The rain in Seattle was a constant companion, a rhythmic drumming against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. I was Julian, 32 years old, standing 17 floors above the gray pavement, sipping black coffee that had long since gone cold. To the world outside this building, I was a ghost. To the people inside, I was the CEO and co-founder of Sentinel, a cybersecurity firm protecting the digital assets of 3 major banks and a dozen Fortune 500 companies. We were worth millions. But to the people who mattered most, my family, I was just Julian, the guy who did something with computers. Maybe fixed printers or rebooted Wi-Fi routers. They didn't know. They never asked. I turned away from the window and checked my phone. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts. Just a notification from my bank. Automatic payments sent, $340, Pacific Power. For the past 2 years, I had quietly subsidized my parents' lives in the suburbs, a 45-minute drive away. I paid their electricity, their water, their cable bill, and even covered a massive roof repair after a winter storm tore through the shingles last year. $15,000. That was the price of my admission into a family that barely acknowledged my existence. I didn't do it for praise. I did it to feel like I had a stake in the home I grew up in. But the thank you never came. The money left my account, and the silence remained. My family's universe revolved around one son, my older brother, Caleb. At 35, Caleb was the golden boy. He was a banker with a blinding smile and an Ivy League degree that my parents, Arthur and Linda, brandished like a royal title. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, the room would gravitate toward him. He would hold court, spinning tales of high-stakes meetings and luxurious trips to Cabo, while I sat at the end of the table, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. Caleb just got a promotion. Arthur would beam, clapping him on the back. Caleb is bringing his new girlfriend, Mia, Linda would whisper excitedly. She's perfect for him. And if someone happened to glance my way? Oh, that's Julian. He's into tech stuff. Always busy. Then, the spotlight would snap back to Caleb, leaving me in the shadows. I wasn't jealous of Caleb's charisma. I was exhausted by my own invisibility. I had built an empire from a laptop in a studio apartment, fueled by insomnia and instant noodles, but to Arthur and Linda, I was still the underachiever who hadn't followed the traditional path. 2 years ago, I stopped going to the gatherings. I told them work was crazy. They didn't push back. They didn't call to check in. My birthday last year passed with a single text from an old college roommate and a promotional email from a dental office. I waited all day for a call from Dad, or even a text from Mom. Nothing. I was a satellite orbiting a planet that didn't know I was there. But April had arrived, bringing with it a date I couldn't ignore, April 25th. My mother's 60th birthday. It was a milestone. Despite the neglect, despite the hollow feeling in my chest, the child in me still craved her approval. I remembered the way she used to hum while gardening when I was 5, before the expectations hardened her affection into judgment. I decided to try one last time. I took a rare afternoon off and drove to a high-end jeweler downtown. I spent an hour picking out a silver necklace with a sapphire pendant, deep blue, her favorite color. It was delicate, expensive, and thoughtful. As the clerk wrapped it in a velvet box, I imagined the scene. I would arrive at the party, hand her the gift, and she would smile. Maybe she would hug me. Maybe Arthur would nod with respect. Maybe, just for a moment, I would be seen. The night before the party, I sat in my apartment, staring at the gift box on my coffee table. The city lights of Seattle blurred in the distance. I knew Caleb would be there with Mia, the new girlfriend everyone was raving about. I had seen the Facebook posts, Caleb beaming, arm around a blonde woman, captioned, "The One." I didn't care about Caleb's love life. I just wanted a seat at the table. The morning of the party, I dressed in a casual button-down, trying to look presentable but not flashy. I grabbed the gift, got into my 7-year-old Honda. I never saw the point in buying a flashy car when I spent all my time at the office, and began the drive to the suburbs. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean, but the knot in my stomach tightened with every mile marker. I was driving toward a house that accepted my money but rejected my identity. I was driving toward a family that treated me like a stranger. As I pulled onto the familiar street lined with maple trees, I took a deep breath. Just get through the afternoon, I told myself. Give her the necklace. Eat a burger. Go home. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't driving toward a reconciliation. I was driving toward the end of my life as I knew it. The backyard of my parents' house had been transformed into a picture-perfect slice of suburban Americana. The scent of charcoal and roasting meat hung heavy in the air, mingling with the lively twang of country music blaring from a Bluetooth speaker. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the fence, and balloons bobbed in the gentle afternoon breeze. It was a celebration of life, of family, and of my mother Linda's 60 years on Earth. Yet, standing by the cooler filled with ice and beer, holding a bottle of lukewarm water, I felt like an intruder in a foreign land. I had arrived early, hoping to be useful. I helped set up the folding tables, wiped down the plastic chairs, and tied balloons to the mailbox. Linda had nodded at me, a quick, distracted acknowledgement, before immediately looking past me to the driveway. "Did Caleb say he was close?" she asked, smoothing her dress. "He's bringing Mia. We need everything to be perfect." "He'll be here, Mom," I said. She didn't reply. She just bustled away to check the potato salad for the third time. By 2 p.m., the yard was full. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who still remembered me as the quiet kid who read too much, and friends of my parents who clearly had no idea who I was. I tried to blend in. I made small talk near the food table. "So, Julian, what are you up to these days?" an uncle asked, balancing a paper plate on his knee. "Still in tech," I said, forcing a smile. "Software development." He nodded, eyes glazing over. "Right. Computers. Good stuff. Hey, did you hear about Caleb's promotion? Vice president at the bank now. Kid's a star." I nodded, gripping my water bottle tighter. "Yeah. He's doing great." Caleb had arrived 20 minutes ago, sweeping in like a politician on the campaign trail. He was tanned, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than my first car, with Mia on his arm. I hadn't met Mia yet, but I saw her from a distance, blonde, poised, laughing at something Caleb whispered. They were immediately swallowed by a crowd of admirers. My parents beamed, flanking them like proud bodyguards. I stayed in the periphery, the gift box with the sapphire necklace burning a hole in my jacket pocket. I told myself to wait for a lull. Just give her the gift, say happy birthday, and leave. But the lull never came. Instead, the music dipped and my father, Arthur, stood up at the head of the main table. His face was flushed, a combination of the midday sun and the 3 beers he'd downed in quick succession. He tapped a fork against his glass, though the yard was already quieting down. "Everyone listen up," Arthur boomed, his voice slurring slightly but carrying that familiar edge of authority. "I want to say a few words about the birthday girl." He spoke about Linda, about their 40 years together. It was standard, heartfelt enough. But then, as always, the gravitational pull of the golden child took over. "And look at this family she raised," Arthur said, gesturing broadly. "We have Caleb here. My boy. Top of his game in Chicago, bringing home a wonderful girl like Mia. We are so damn proud of you, son." Applause rippled through the yard. Caleb smiled, a practiced, modest tilt of his head. Then, Arthur's eyes kept moving. They swept past the smiling faces and landed on me, standing alone by the cooler in my muddy shoes. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. "And then," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, dripping with disdain, "there's Julian." The applause died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. "Julian," Arthur continued, pointing a finger at me like a weapon. "Who comes here with his secrets? Doing God knows what with computers. Probably fixing printers or playing games. He shows up here, haunting the place like a bad memory. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around, hoping someone, Mom, Caleb, anyone, would step in. Linda looked down at her hands. Caleb took a sip of his beer, looking away. Arthur wasn't finished. The alcohol had loosened the filter he usually kept in place. "You embarrass this family, Julian," Arthur spat, the words cutting through the humid air. "You stand there with nothing to show for your life while your brother builds a legacy. Why did you even come?" I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to scream that I paid for the roof over his head, but my throat seized. Arthur raised his glass, his eyes dead. "If you're going to just stand there like a failure, then get out. In fact, Julian, if you don't leave right now, don't bother calling me your father anymore." The sentence hung in the air, absolute and brutal. I felt 50 pairs of eyes on me. Some were pitying, some were shocked, but most were just relieved it wasn't them. I looked at my mother one last time. She didn't look up. She didn't fight for me. The connection snapped. The hope I had carried in my pocket alongside that sapphire necklace shattered. I didn't say a word. There was no point. I turned my back on them, on the barbecue, on the balloons, and on the lie that I was part of this family. I walked across the grass, my shoes sinking into the mud softened by the morning rain, staring straight ahead at the gate. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to fade into the gray Seattle mist and never look back. I was halfway to the driveway when a voice rang out, clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. "Hey, boss." I stopped. I froze. The entire yard froze. I knew that voice. But she shouldn't know me. Not here. Not as boss. I didn't turn around, but the exile had just been interrupted. I stopped. My shoes were caked in mud, my hand gripped the cold metal of the gate, but my feet wouldn't move. Those two words, "Hey, boss," hung in the air, defiant and impossible, suspending the moment in a bizarre stasis. I didn't turn around immediately. I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe a cruel joke. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of judgment anymore. It was the silence of confusion. "Mia?" Caleb's voice broke the quiet, laced with a nervous chuckle. "Babe, I think the wine's gone to your head. That's Julian. My little brother." I turned slowly. Mia stood at the edge of the patio, having stepped away from Caleb's side. She looked out of place in this backyard of casual cruelty, her white dress pristine, her expression sharp and sober. She wasn't looking at Caleb. She was looking directly at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and dawning horror. "I know who he is, Caleb," Mia said, her voice steady, projecting clearly across the yard. She took a step toward me, ignoring the hand Caleb reached out to stop her. "But I don't think you do." The guests exchanged glances. The murmurs started up again, a low buzz of whispers. "Mia, seriously," Caleb stepped forward, his smile faltering, his eyes darting between his girlfriend and his exiled brother. "He fixes computers." "Julian." "He's the CEO of Sentinel," Mia stated flatly. She turned to face the crowd, addressing them as if she were in a boardroom, not a barbecue. "I'm a senior accountant at Sentinel Cybersecurity. Julian isn't just the IT guy. He founded the company. He's the reason we just signed contracts with 3 of the largest banks on the West Coast. He signs my paychecks." The air left the backyard. It was as if a vacuum had been switched on, sucking away the music, the wind, and the arrogance. My mother, Linda, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Arthur, who had been towering over the table like a king just moments ago, slowly sank back into his chair, his face draining of color. "Sentinel?" a neighbor whispered loudly. "The company downtown? The one in the glass tower?" "The one worth millions," Mia confirmed, looking back at me with a nod of professional respect. "He built it from nothing. He's one of the most brilliant leaders I've ever worked for." I stood by the gate, feeling exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted a grand reveal. I just wanted to leave with my dignity intact. But now, the curtain was ripped away. Caleb looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in his life. His mouth hung slightly open, his mind struggling to reconcile the brother he pitted with the man his girlfriend called boss. The power dynamic in the yard shifted violently. The pity in the guest's eyes evaporated, replaced by a hungry curiosity. Arthur stood up again. He moved stiffly, like a man waking from a dream. He looked at Mia, then at me. The disdain was gone, replaced by a frantic calculation. "Julian," Arthur called out. His voice wasn't booming anymore. It was thin, wavering. Is this true?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had just told me I was no longer his son. I saw the gears turning in his head, not regret for how he treated me, but shock at the asset he had just discarded. "Why didn't you say anything?" Arthur demanded, his tone shifting to accusation, as if my silence were the crime, not his cruelty. "We're your family. Why hide this?" The audacity of the question nearly made me laugh. I looked at Linda, who was staring at me with wide, wet eyes, but she still didn't move toward me. She stayed by the potato salad, rooted in her passivity. I took a deep breath, the damp Seattle air filling my lungs. I could have shouted. I could have listed every time I tried to talk about my work only to be interrupted by a story about Caleb. I could have thrown the $15,000 worth of bills in their faces. But I realized, looking at them, that they didn't deserve my anger. They didn't deserve my explanations. "You never asked," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the yard, it landed like a gavel. I looked at Mia and gave her a small, grateful nod. She looked down, embarrassed for the family she had just married into by association. I turned back to the gate. "Julian! Wait!" Arthur shouted, stumbling slightly as he tried to navigate around the table. "Son, wait. Let's talk about this." "Don't," I said, not looking back. "You made it clear, Arthur. I'm not your son anymore." I walked through the gate, the metal latch clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I walked to my beat-up Honda, the car of a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. As I started the engine, I could hear the chaos erupting in the backyard behind me, the questions, the shouting, the recriminations. But I was already gone. I pulled away from the curb, the velvet box with the sapphire necklace still heavy in my pocket, driving away from the house, the barbecue, and the people who had just realized, far too late, exactly who they had thrown away. My apartment in downtown Seattle was quiet. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence that used to greet me after family gatherings. It was a sanctuary. I tossed my keys into the bowl and placed the velvet gift box on my desk. I didn't open it. I didn't cry over it. I simply let it sit there, a tombstone for a relationship that had died years ago, even if I was the last one to notice. I sat down at my computer, the glow of the dual monitors illuminating the darkened room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years, I had been the silent safety net beneath my parents' tightrope act. They lived beyond their means, buoyed by Caleb's tales of wealth and my actual money. I logged into my banking portal. The list of automatic payments scrolled down the screen like a ledger of my own stupidity. Pacific Power, $340. Seattle Public Utilities, $120. Comcast Xfinity, $180. Roof repair loan, $450. I stared at the total. Over $15,000 in 2 years. $15,000 to buy a seat at a table where I wasn't allowed to speak. Arthur had told me to leave. He had told me I wasn't his son. I decided to take him at his word. Cancel recurring payment. Cancel recurring payment. I went down the list, methodically severing every financial artery connecting me to the house in the suburbs. It wasn't executed with rage. It was a business decision. I was cutting my losses on a bad investment. 3 days later, the fallout arrived. I was in a meeting with my lead developers when my phone buzzed. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again immediately. And a third time. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Hello. Julian. Linda's voice was high, bordering on hysterical. The lights went out. The refrigerator is off. The TV is dead. Everything is dark. I know, I said calmly, leaning against the glass wall overlooking the rainy city. I canceled the payments, Mom. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a gasp of indignation. You what? How could you do that? You know your father and I are on a fixed income. You know we can't cover the electricity this month. I assume Caleb can cover it, I said. He's the vice president of a bank, isn't he? He's the legacy. Caleb has expenses, she snapped, her tone shifting from panic to accusation. He has a lifestyle to maintain. You can't just pull the rug out from under us, Julian. And after what you did at the party, making a scene, embarrassing us in front of the neighbors. I actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I embarrassed you? Dad kicked me out. He publicly disowned me in front of 50 people. Did you expect me to keep paying his bills after that? He was just stressed. Linda argued, rewriting history in real time. And that girl, Mia, is saying you're her boss? You set that up, didn't you? To humiliate your brother. I didn't set anything up, Mom. I just built a company. You just never noticed. Turn the power back on, Julian. Right now. The food in the freezer is going to spoil. Call Caleb, I said. Goodbye, Linda. I hung up before she could say another word. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt lighter. An hour later, the text from Caleb arrived. Caleb, 3:14 p.m. You think you're funny? Mia broke up with me. She said she couldn't date a guy who treats his family like trash. Thanks a lot, bro. You made me look like an idiot in front of everyone. Fix the damn power. Mom is crying. I read the message twice. Not a single question about how I was. Not a single apology for Arthur's behavior. Just anger that I had damaged his image and cost him his girlfriend. He didn't mourn the loss of our brotherhood, he mourned the loss of his status. I didn't reply. I simply selected the message and hit delete. By the end of the week, the gossip had reached the city. A friend from college texted me, "Heard you're a secret millionaire and your dad kicked you out?" Legend. The narrative in the suburbs was shifting. The neighbors were talking about the tech CEO, who had been treated like a pariah. My parents were scrambling, trying to save face, telling anyone who would listen that I was an ungrateful son who had abandoned them in their old age. Let them talk. I sat in my apartment that evening, the city lights twinkling below me. My phone was silent. The bills were canceled. The tether was cut. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to call. I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. The darkness had fallen over their house in the suburbs, but in my life, the lights were finally on. The storm had returned to Seattle, a relentless downpour that battered the windows of my apartment. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the birthday party. I was reading a book, enjoying the silence, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the monitor. 2 figures stood in the hallway, huddled in dripping raincoats. I opened the door. Arthur and Linda stood there, looking smaller and older than I remembered. They were soaked, their hair plastered to their foreheads, shivering slightly. "Hello, Julian," Arthur said, his voice lacking its usual boom. I stepped aside. "Come in." They entered, dripping water onto the hardwood floors. They looked around my apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern art, the quiet luxury of the life I had built without them. They sat gingerly on the sofa, looking like wet birds. "We tried to call," Linda said, clutching her purse. "You didn't answer." "I was busy," I said, remaining standing. "What do you want?" Arthur cleared his throat. "We need to clear the air, son. About the party. It was a misunderstanding. I had too much to drink. You know how I get. I just wanted you to do better, to be more like Caleb. But it got out of hand. I stared at him, marveling at the revisionist history. A misunderstanding? You called me an embarrassment. You told me not to call you my father. Arthur waved a hand dismissively. Heat of the moment. We're family, Julian. Families fight. He paused, then got to the point. Look, things are tight. The power is back on, but only because we dipped into the savings. Caleb? Well, Caleb is going through a hard time since Mia left him. He can't help right now. So you came to me, I said. We need $2,000 a month, Linda said, her voice trembling. Just to cover the basics. The mortgage, the utilities, the medical bills. We're getting old, Julian. I looked at them. No apology. No, I'm proud of you. Just a demand. They still saw me as a transaction. I walked to the kitchen island and leaned against it. I have conditions. Arthur frowned. Conditions? If I restart the payments, I said calmly, Caleb contributes $1,000 a month. I don't care how he gets it. He's the vice president of a bank, he can figure it out. He has expenses. Linda protested. And second, I continued, ignoring her, I want a legal contract. A lien on the house. If I'm paying for the maintenance and the mortgage, the title transfers to me upon your passing. I'm not throwing money into a black hole anymore. It's an investment. Arthur shot to his feet, his face flushing that familiar, dangerous red. You ungrateful brat. You dare put conditions on your parents? You want to steal our house? I'm not stealing anything, I said, my voice steady. I'm protecting my assets. I'm a businessman, Arthur. You know that now. Who do you think you are? Arthur shouted, stepping toward me. You think because you have money you can dictate terms to me? I am your father. And I am the man who paid your bills for 2 years without a thank you, I replied, unflinching. I don't owe you anything. Not my money, not my respect, and certainly not my silence. If you want my help, you treat me like a partner. If not, the door is there. Linda burst into tears. Julian, please. How can you be so cold? I learned it from you, I said softly. Arthur stared at me, his chest heaving. He looked for the cowering boy I used to be, the one who sought his approval. He didn't find him. He found a stranger who wasn't afraid of him anymore. Let's go, Linda, Arthur spat. We don't need his charity. They left. The door clicked shut, cutting off Arthur's muttering and Linda's sobs. The apartment fell silent again, save for the rain. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying until it was gone. I sat back down. My phone pinged with an email. It was from Mia. Subject, checking in. Hey boss. I heard about Caleb. I broke it off. I can't be with someone who treats people like that. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened at the party, but I'm glad everyone knows who you really are now. See you Monday. I smiled. That weekend, I went to a painting class I had signed up for months ago but never attended. The instructor told us to paint a memory. I painted the backyard. The green grass, the maple trees, the golden afternoon light. But I didn't paint the angry father or the silent mother. I didn't paint the lonely man holding a water bottle. I painted the gate, standing wide open. I looked at the canvas. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was honest. It was the moment I walked away. It was the moment I realized that family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins, but who respects you enough to let you grow. I washed my brush, the colors swirling in the water, blue like the sapphire necklace I still kept in my desk, green like the grass, gray like the rain. I was Julian. I was a CEO. I was a son who had fired his parents. And for the first time in 32 years, I was free.